they cultivated canes, ground provisions, and fruit trees. They built houses which told of their status as landowners and independent small farmers. Solid structures made partly of stone wall, costing between $1,500 and $3,000 of today's currency. But they were not only farmers. Richard Lynch kept a huckster's shop. Corrin Headley was a carpenter. James Lynch kept a school, and Joseph King was a superintendent of highways.
And the warm lips drink from it, until the town begins to speak, and spread its song. When the thirst burns the mind, may we return again to the villages, where we shall partake in a feast with those that are no more.
The study of the communities built by the ex-slaves and immigrant laborers in the Caribbean began on a very small scale in the 1950s. Work has since been done by a few scholars, mainly in Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Antigua. But almost nothing has appeared on the free village system in Barbados. And one probable reason for this neglect has been the popular belief, only recently challenged, that hardly any peasants or small landowners existed in Barbados between 1838 and 1900. As a matter of fact, only one free village in Barbados has been studied. That's Workman's Village. The second such study to appear is that of the Rock Hall Village. This resulted from a search for the first free village in Barbados by the Barbadian historian, Professor Woodville Marshall, and his honorary research assistant, another Barbadian historian, Mr. Ronnie Hughes.
This is a study of the formation of a free village. By a free village, I mean that Rock Hall was not and is not a plantation tenantry. In a tenantry, the residents live on the plantation's land and are obliged to offer a portion of their labor to the plantation. On the other hand, the residents of a free village own the land on which they live and therefore possess a measure of independence of the surrounding plantations.
The village of Rock Hall is situated at the east of St. Thomas Parish Church, to the west of the District D police station, and around the St. Thomas District Hospital. It stretches along Highway 1A, extends to the gully in the north, and is less dominated by the road system than most villages. The idea of a search for the first free village came about when Professor Marshall was preparing a paper on the peasantry in Barbados.
I came across a reference by John Carew, the police magistrate for St. Thomas, in his 1841 report to a village which turned out to be Rock Hall. Carew was reporting on the acquisition of small holdings by ex-slaves, and also too on the development of villages by ex-slaves. And he said, "They would no doubt be most happy to become freeholders had they the means of accomplishing that desirable object, as may be seen by the erection of a new village near the parish church by the laborers of Mount Wilton Plantation under the will of their late master, Reynold Allen Elcock Esquire, from whom was bequeathed to his laborers so large a sum as £7,055, and which sum they have received since their freedom."
The search for the first free village had begun. The discovery of a generation of people unknown and unnoticed while making history. Breakers of rocks, whom death would have found, no matter their state or station, alive. With that great hope, their day will come.
And if I do not live to see that day, my child will see it. And if he does not see it, his child will see it. And it will come circling the world like fire. It will come to this land and every land. And when it comes, I'll come alive again and laugh again and walk out to this prison.
To trace the origins of Rock Hall, it was necessary to search police and magistrates' reports, tax rolls, censuses, voters' registers, deeds, wills, newspapers, the records of surveyors, registers of births and baptism, vestry minutes, as well as to seek oral sources. That is, to listen to ordinary people talking about their daily lives and what they remember of the lives of others. In 1975, the village was identified as Rock Hall by one of Professor Marshall's research students, Bentley Gibbs, then conducting research work in London. His search of the semi-annual police magistrates' reports revealed that Rock Hall was the village first referred to in 1841, and that Bridgefield was a second village formed by some of the Mount Wilton laborers. All of this was confirmed a little later when Professor Marshall acquired a microfilm copy of the report. What was this Elcock legacy? But first, who was this man Elcock? Reynold Allen Elcock lived from 1789 to 1821. He was the proprietor of the Mount Wilton estate, where he lived separated from his wife. He was a wealthy man, the owner of 214 slaves. His 620-acre estate stretched across the high rainfall parishes of St. Thomas and St. Joseph, and it was described in 1837 by two visitors to the island as the noblest estate in the island. Elcock wrote his will in November 1820 at the age of 31. He made what one historian of the period described as extraordinary and unprecedented provisions for the slaves of the Mount Wilton estate.
I direct that immediately on my death, that all my Negro houses be put in complete repair, let it cost what it may, and furnished with plain bedsteads, blankets, chairs, tables and iron pots. And that all I now possess, with the blessing I owe to their exertion, I am determined that they shall enjoy a fair portion of my wealth, and therefore I direct that the sum of £5 be paid annually on the first day of June to each labouring adult, besides their usual allowance.
It is not completely clear why Alcock made these liberal provisions for his slaves. One possibility is that they were made out of gratitude, as indicated by the following phrase in the will: in consideration of the uniform good conduct of my Negroes, and more particularly in the insurrection.
Alcock was obviously referring to the slave rebellion of April 1816, when 400 slaves lost their lives and some 180 plantations suffered damage amounting to £170,000.
Although the rebellion was mainly concentrated in St. Philip, Christchurch, St. George, and St. John, unrest clearly spread among the slaves in other parts of the island, and a state of alarm was felt by most planters. It is of the greatest significance that Mount Wilton appears not to have been affected by the rebellion in any way, while, on the other hand, at least 6 of the neighboring plantations were involved in the rebellion to some degree.
For that reason, I'm inclined to take seriously what Shilston says. The provisions of the will lend color to the legend that he was a strict disciplinarian and slave master, although manifestly indulgent and generous in other respects where his Negroes were concerned.
In other words, Alcock believed that once the virtues of discipline were well implanted, and once the value of such an exercise was clearly apparent, as it must have been during the 1816 slave rebellion, then reward should be offered to those who had learnt their lessons well.
Whatever the truth of the matter, Alcock was murdered in October 1821. 3 of his house slaves, James, Jack Craig, his valet and personal servant, Geoffrey, and a slave from a neighboring estate, Billy Prince, cut his throat from ear to ear while he slept in his bed.
The question which must arise is, were the provisions of Alcock's will the motive for his murder? The available evidence does not provide a clear answer. It suggests that the slaves were paying Alcock back for his harsh treatment of some of them. However, it is also probable that a version of the contents of the will had become known to some of the house slaves, and believing that the will would have given them freedom, they conspired to kill Alcock in order to hasten their release from slavery.
Alcock's murderers were hanged on Mount Wilton Estate. Their heads were cut off and displayed on long poles in a public place. Their bodies were hung in chains in some public place on the plantation as a grim warning to the other slaves. But it appears as if this was not punishment enough. Although Alcock's will was proved in October 1821, and despite clarity of his instructions to his trustees, the Mount Wilton slaves never received their annuities, but instead received a lump sum nearly 20 years later.
The reason given for the delay in payment by both Alcock's heirs and his trustees was the indebtedness of the estate, although the annual payments would have amounted to only £600.
There were some 120 adult slaves who would have been eligible for the £5.
Despite this indebtedness, however, 19 years after the will was proved, the absentee owners of the Mount Wilton estate, Alcock's daughter, Mary, and her husband, Thomas Noel Harris, decided to advance the money to pay the annuities as a lump sum. Mary and Thomas said they were making the payments because the legatees had become very urgent in their demands for the money due them.
The new factor in the situation was evidently the ex-slaves' active exercise of newly acquired rights. Apparently, some of them had managed to persuade planter and parliamentarian for St. Thomas, Dr. J.S. Bascom, and St. Thomas magistrate, Mr. John Carew, to intercede on their behalf.
The both must have played some part in the settlement, for George Hewitt, attorney of the Mount Wilton estate, confirmed that both Bascom and Carew had been invited to witness the settlement of the laborers' claims.
On June 30th, 1840, each of the 83 individuals received a check drawn on the West India Bank for £85. And on the 1st of July, the 83 legatees affixed their marks to a legal document which declared that they had received full payment of their annuities and that the owners of Mount Wilton estate were forever released and discharged from the annuities and any claims or challenges in respect of the annuities.
Full payment was £5, the sum mentioned by Alcock multiplied by 17, the number of years that had elapsed between Alcock's death and the full emancipation of the slaves in 1838. It is also noteworthy that nothing was added as interest to cover the years of non-payment. Examination of the list of those who received the £85 reveals some interesting things.
52 of the 83 were women, 13 were of mixed race, and a mere 5, all men, had been born in Africa. In addition, the list shows that at least 3 of the couples, and perhaps as many as 12, received £175 per couple because both man and wife were entitled to receive a share of the legacy.
We also found that most of the legatees were middle-aged. This is not surprising when we take account of the 19-year lapse between Alcock's death and the payment.
This undoubtedly affected patterns of landholding among the legatees and their families, since most of the original landowners would have died within 15 years of the acquisition of their freeholds. Therefore, subdivision of the original holdings would have started early. Both Thomas Benman and John Seal died in 1854 during the cholera epidemic, and James Trotman divided his 2 acres among 4 children, also in 1854.
The next problem that faced the historians was trying to establish that some of the legatees participated in the formation of a Rock Hall village between 1840 and 1841. An attempt was made, too, to establish whether Rock Hall was an estate and who owned it.
We found evidence of the existence of a Rock Hall property on the Baralier map of 1825, but we found no trace of the owner. Next, we turned to see if we could identify any transfer of land from planters in the vicinity of Rock Hall to the legatees. This also failed. We now turned to oral sources.
Praise God.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Are you Mrs. Ada Marshall?
Yes, please.
And may we talk with you for a little while, please?
Oh, yes.
Yes, well, we want to talk to you because we are 2 historians from the university. And we are trying to find out something about the origins of this village, you know, where the people came from, how they got money to buy land, where they might have had their land and things like that. We want to know if you remember anything because we were told up the road that you're one of the people who might remember something. Can you tell me anything about that?
There's people to my knowledge. Some come from Mount Wilton. But the most come from Mount Wilton. This was a little estate named Rock Hall. But the road, the below the road that then carry you down the hill.
Yes, I see. But why did the people come here? They had money, and why did they come here to live?
Well, I couldn't tell about that. I was born here. I was born in 16th December in 1888. That is the. I was born in C. Mr. Padmore, they lived around in there. Mr. Padmore, he lived there. Mr. Green, they lived there. Mr. Douglas, they lived there. Miss Hall.
But tell me though, where did you hear this thing from, that the people came from, Uncle William?
Well, I hear it from the people that they live both here and there. Then one called the other one to come from Mount Wilton.
Yeah, so even when you were a little girl, they were still saying that they came from Wilton. Yeah. Now, what about how they got the land? How did they manage to buy land? Must have had money. You know, you heard anything about that? How they got money?
I don't know how to get the money, but this was a estate and it fell out. Name Rock Hall. And it fell out. And
so, I mean, as far as you believe or heard, and it is just the money that they were saving up that they used to buy the land. Mm-hmm. You ever heard of anybody left money for them?
They killed the manager at Mount Wilton, and they take really money and thing and come down here and buy the land. Mr. Green, they lived there. Mr. Douglas, they lived there.
It is clear that 13 spots were owned by individuals who had the same second name as legatees. These are Blenman, Clark, Daniel, Downs, Lewis, Lynch, Maynard, Murphy, Pinder, Small, Trotman, Wilson, and Worrell.
When all hope of tracing the transfer of land had apparently disappeared, Hughes discovered that he had earlier noted an advertisement of a 1783 auction